With his voice choked with emotion, Brian Hooker, the man whose wife disappeared after falling off their dinghy in the Bahamas, describes the desperate search for Lynette.
He told me he had someone killed. That's what a woman says her stepson told her 40 years ago. On a night he showed up at her door looking like he'd walked out of a war. No name, no date anyone can confirm, no police file anywhere that matches it. Just a claim sitting in one woman's memory for 4 decades, until her stepson's wife vanished from a sailboat in the Bahamas, and she decided it was time to say it out loud. Quick note before we go further. What you just heard is one person's recollection, not a confirmed fact. We'll treat it that way the whole way through. If you're watching this from Michigan, the Bahamas, or we are anywhere near open water, drop it in the comments. This is a story that keeps circling back to how much can vanish between 2 people in a small boat at night with no one else around to see it. Start with where things actually stand right now, because the story has moved a long way from where it began. Brian Hooker's account of that night has not changed since April. His wife fell overboard, he says, from an 8-foot dinghy in bad weather, while she was holding the only key. The 2 of them had left a restaurant on Hopetown around 7:30 in the evening, heading back out to their sailboat, the Soulmate, anchored off Elbow Cay. The engine cut out the second the key went into the water with her. He paddled the small boat back alone in the dark, reached a marina hours later, and reported her missing before dawn. That account has been under pressure ever since, and it keeps failing in new ways. A friend of the couple, someone who knew them from their time in the Bahamas, described that 8-foot dinghy as underpowered and undersized for the conditions that night. Not the kind of boat you'd want to be caught in if the weather really did turn the way Brian described it. Then came the phone. Investigators pulled location data off one of Brian's devices, a marine navigation app, and found it didn't match the account he'd given. The device showed a track out on the water, stopping somewhere in the Sea of Abaco, then heading back, a route that didn't line up with where he'd sent search crews. Weeks of searching had happened in the wrong stretch of sea because of the story he told. Once the data surfaced, the Coast Guard reopened the case and asked Bahamian authorities for permission to send divers into the area the device actually pointed to. Then came something worse for him. Family members say investigators told them the evidence suggests Lynette made it back on board the Soulmate that night, not swept out to sea from a dinghy, alone, in the dark, the way he's always said. Back on the sailboat, with him. Investigators are now examining whether a physical altercation happened on that deck before she disappeared. The sailboat was seized by the Coast Guard in May, roughly 40 nautical miles off the Florida coast, and brought back to the United States. The dinghy followed in June, seized in the Bahamas. Both are being processed at an FBI facility in Virginia. Family members have already given DNA swabs to help identify anything investigators find. The arrest itself came days after she vanished. Bahamian police took him into custody, questioned him, and held him right up against a legal deadline for filing charges. When that deadline passed without charges being filed, he was released. At the time, the police commissioner overseeing the case said publicly that he would remain a suspect regardless. He's since returned to the United States. Brian Hooker has not been charged with anything. In the days after his wife vanished, he posted publicly that he was heartbroken, describing unpredictable seas and high winds that pulled them apart despite what he called desperate attempts to reach her. He said since, on camera, that he never harmed Lynette and never would. His lawyer has said the same and has declined further comment while the investigation continues. A recording surfaced that added another layer. Friends of the couple shared what they said was a phone call with Brian from just days after Lynette disappeared. On it, a voice says she bounced off the dinghy, that neither of them had life jackets on, and that she didn't grab a flotation cushion that had been thrown toward her in the water. The same friends have said that in the months since, nearly everyone who's come forward with anything to say about Brian has said something negative, and that they weren't expecting that pattern to change. More recently, a podcast host who's spoken directly with the family relayed something even harder to hear. She said the family told her investigators believe there were signs of a struggle aboard the Soulmate, and evidence suggesting Lynette did not survive that struggle. The Coast Guard, when asked about that specific claim, declined to confirm it, and has separately pushed back on characterizations of the case as a confirmed murder investigation. So file that one exactly where it belongs. A second-hand account, relayed through family, of what investigators are believed to have told them, not a public finding from investigators themselves. In those first days, the search effort itself was massive. Local volunteers, the Royal Bahamas Police Force, the Royal Bahamas Defense Force, and the U.S. Coast Guard all worked the water around Hopetown and Elbow Cay, covering as much of the Sea of Abaco as they could reach. A local rescue team leader described it as an all-hands response from the moment Brian reported her missing. None of it turned up Lynette, and none of it, it would later turn out, was searching quite where it needed to be. There's an irony sitting underneath all of it that's hard to ignore. Online, the two of them had built a whole persona around this life. A married couple living their best life, sailing to New Orleans, Key West, Miami Beach, the Great Lakes, posting snorkeling trips and scuba dives, calling each other co-captains. 25 years of marriage, documented in real time, right up until the trip that ended with only one of them coming back. Two daughters are watching this play out from opposite corners of Lynette's life. Carly Aylesworth doubted the story from the first phone call. She's described her stepfather as sounding strangely calm, relaying what happened, almost monotone, and says that struck her as wrong before she knew anything else about the case. She said her stepfather always drove the boat, never Lynette, so the detail about her holding the key never sat right. She's called her mother a strong, physically fit swimmer who'd been sailing for over a decade, not someone who'd easily be swept away by current. And she says there's history behind the calm version of events Brian gave. She's described him choking her mother in the past and threatening to throw her overboard long before any of this happened in the Bahamas. Early on, before any of the newer evidence existed, she publicly asked for a full and thorough investigation, saying only that she'd learned of unspecified prior issues in the marriage worth looking into, and that if this genuinely was an accident, she could accept that, but only after everything had actually been examined properly first. Carly Hooker is his own daughter with Lynette. She's the one who says he threatened this exact scenario roughly 2 years before it happened. Her words, more or less. He said he was going to do this, and now it's happening, and that's not something she's willing to call a coincidence. She also described an earlier fight, where she says he choked her mother and told her he'd kill her and throw her overboard. Lynette left him after that. Then, months later, went back, and Carly's guess is that the fighting simply kept going after that. Lynette's mother, Darlene Hamlet, has her own account, and it may be the heaviest one of all. She says her daughter called her not long before the trip and told her she couldn't take it anymore, told her mother to expect her home, bought a plane ticket, never got on the plane. Darlene has also said publicly on the record that her daughter made it back to the boat that night and that there was foul play. She hasn't explained exactly how she knows that. She said only that the Coast Guard told her what she could and couldn't say publicly, and that she's staying inside those limits until she's told otherwise. Back at the start, when Brian was first taken into custody, Darlene said only that she wanted to hear what he had to say for himself, and that she hadn't spoken to him in days. She'd rushed to get an expedited passport so she could fly down and be closer to the search. There's a family history here too, quieter than the rest, but worth noting. Back in 2015, Lynette was arrested after a domestic incident involving mutual assault allegations between her and Brian. No charges were filed. A warrant request was denied at the time for insufficient evidence about who actually started the altercation. It's not proof of anything on its own, but set against everything that's come out since, it's one more data point suggesting this wasn't the peaceful, sun-soaked marriage the social media posts made it look like. And now Donna Hooker, the stepmother, married to Brian's father George for more than 4 decades until his death 7 months ago, has stepped into the story with a claim that predates all of it by decades. Donna Hooker says she lived with Brian for part of his teenage years in the 1980s in her home in Oregon. She describes him back then as intelligent, a voracious reader, quiet, the kind of teenager who kept to his room and didn't show much emotion either way. Not, on the surface, the kind of kid you'd expect trouble from. Then, she says, he left for Hawaii. Went to live on the beach, the way a lot of young people did back then, chasing something looser than the life he'd left behind in the Pacific Northwest. At some point, she says, that fell apart. He showed up back at her door in Oregon, and she remembers exactly how he looked. Long hair, a bandana around his head, a trench coat, combat boots. She says he looked terrible, like someone who'd been through something. And she says, in that state, standing in her doorway, he told her he'd had someone killed. On the island, while he was out there living on the beach. She says she wasn't sure whether to believe him. Wasn't sure if it was a story a rough, scared kid tells to sound harder than he actually is, or something that had genuinely happened 4,000 miles from home, with nobody around to witness it or ever connect the dots back to him. She never reported it. There was nothing to report. No name of a victim, no location, no body, nothing but a single sentence from a shaken-looking man in his early 20s standing on her porch. 40 years passed. As far as anyone can find, nothing happened. No arrest tied to it, no cold case out of Hawaii that's ever been publicly linked to him, no confirmation the incident even occurred. Then, this April, his wife disappeared off a boat in the Bahamas, under circumstances that keep getting harder for him to explain. And Donna Hooker decided that decades-old sentence was worth saying out loud on a true crime podcast for the first time in her life. She's also said she doesn't believe the story Brian gave authorities about the Bahamas. She's called him a sneaky, dishonest person, and said that pattern goes back to when she knew him as a teenager. She's mentioned separately that she believes he's been married more than once before Lynette, though that's her own characterization, not something independently documented anywhere in the reporting around this case. She says investigators in the Bahamas or here in the United States still haven't called her. She says she's willing to talk if they do, and that she reached out to a journalist herself after learning of her stepson's arrest from a relative's phone call because she felt she had information worth sharing and nowhere official to put it. She's tried reaching other family members since, without much luck getting responses. There is no way, right now, to confirm any part of the Hawaii story. There's no way to disprove it either. It exists exactly the way one woman remembers it, from one specific doorway, on one specific night, and nowhere else. What makes the claim land differently now isn't new evidence surfacing out of Hawaii. Nothing new has come out of Hawaii at all. It's the pattern building around Brian in the present that changes how people hear an old story. The phone data that put search crews in the wrong stretch of ocean for weeks. The boat data suggesting his wife came back aboard before she vanished. Not after falling from a dinghy, he was nowhere near when it happened. The altercation investigators are now trying to rule in or out using forensic evidence pulled off the Soulmate itself. Even a detail as small as an expensive thermal camera mounted on the boat that night, one a family friend says was never used in the search for Lynette, despite being right there the whole time. None of that proves what happened, or didn't happen, 40 years ago on a beach in Hawaii. But it's the reason people are willing to listen to a decades-old story they might have dismissed outright back in April, before any of this present-day evidence existed. It's worth being precise about what's actually solid here, because it's easy to let the two threads blur together into one big story when really they're separate. Here's what's solid. Lynette Hooker has been missing since the night of April 4th. Her husband's account of that night has been directly contradicted more than once by data pulled from his own devices and from the boat itself. Two of her daughters and her mother have all, independently and without coordinating, cast doubt on the story he's told publicly. There's a documented 2015 domestic incident between them. Investigators have not filed charges against him, but they haven't cleared him either, and the case remains an open, active criminal investigation on both sides of the water. Here's what isn't solid. Whether anything happened on a beach in Hawaii sometime in the 1980s. That story exists in one person's memory, told decades after the fact, with absolutely nothing else to check it against. No missing person filed from that era who's ever been tied to him. No arrest record, no name. It may be exactly true. It may be a frightened young man's exaggeration that got repeated for 40 years and hardened into something that sounds like a confession. Nobody currently knows which, and that includes everyone telling this story right now, this video included. Everyone named here is presumed innocent unless and until proven otherwise in a court of law. The claims from family members, including the account from Brian Hooker's stepmother, are personal recollections and allegations. None of them have been tested in court, and the Hawaii claim in particular has never been corroborated by any independent source, document, or witness. This video does not accuse any individual of a crime. It presents publicly available reporting and on-the-record statements, so viewers can follow an active investigation as it continues to unfold. Whatever happened on that boat in April, and whatever did or didn't happen on a beach in Hawaii 40 years before that, none of it changes what's actually missing right now. A woman who grew up on the water in a family that spent generations around lakes and boats. A strong, capable swimmer who'd been sailing for years. Someone her own daughter insists wouldn't have been the one holding the key because she never was. Lynette Hooker has been gone since early April. Her family is still asking questions that nobody in a position of authority seems fully willing to answer yet. Her mother is still waiting on a phone call that, as of now, still hasn't come. Divers have gone back into the water looking for her more than once, drones and cadaver dogs alongside them, working stretches of the Sea of Elbow the case has repeatedly returned to. Each search has ended without finding her. The boat that was supposed to be their shared adventure sits seized in a federal facility, being taken apart piece by piece for answers nobody has found yet. Even a detail as basic as Brian Hooker's age has turned out to be unsettled. Some records list him at 58. Others put him at 59. Nobody reporting on this case has been able to say why the discrepancy exists. It's a small thing on its own. But in a story where almost nothing about his account has held up cleanly under scrutiny, even the small things stop feeling small. Somewhere in the sea of Abaco, or somewhere else entirely, the truth about what happened to Lynette Hooker is still sitting, unspoken, the same way a stranger's story sat quietly in a stepmother's memory for 40 years before anyone finally thought to ask her about it. Every part of this case is still moving. New data, new statements, new claims from people who've stayed quiet until now. The Hawaii story is the newest thread, and it may end up being the least important one, or it may not. Right now, nobody watching this, and nobody making it, can honestly say which. If you want to keep following cases like this one as they develop, go ahead and subscribe. It helps more than you'd think.